Okay, well, I'll just jump straight in then. This was research we did about 18 months ago, which is sort of forever in the age of AI, I guess. Things move quite quickly, but we'll jump over things quite as quick as I can. ChatGPT released November 2022. I think all assessors around the world felt a bit of the wave from that in whatever subject you're in. I think maths felt a bit safer. It was mostly the essay-based subjects that I think people had concerns about initially. But obviously, as AI started to get slightly better at these assessment style questions, there was more of a concern, and the maths department in Warwick started to think, do we need some more rigorous and formal understanding to make sure or some sort of research to make sure we've got at least know what the sort of groundwork is on that. So the three main goals for our project we wanted to investigate were how well is AI currently, how well is it solving assignments as of right now? That again is 18 months ago, but at the time is what we wanted to know. How are the students actually using it specifically? And then how should we maybe change assignments? That is sort of the good, big, holy question. I don't know how easy that is to answer, and everyone's sort of come up with their own different solutions, but it's something we wanted to investigate. Um, just for some more background, this research was based on GPT-4o. I don't know how familiar you are with the sort of progression, or you guys are with the progression of ChatGPT and how it's gone along. But 4o was one of the more um, optimized, faster versions of GPT. It wasn't necessarily one of the smartest models, and it just so happened that as soon as we finished our research, ChatGPT released O1, which was a model specialized in longer form reasoning and mathematics questions. So all of this research was based on quite what you've concerned a simple chatbot and at this point outdated chatbot. So yeah, while we tested it, while we have got the results, I've got to stress again, these were 18 months ago. Things have changed a lot since then, and it's a quick demonstration of that and how you can, change your slide very quickly, both for better and for worse. So. Let's start with how well can AI solve our assignments. So we got asked all the lecturers for a version of their assignments they'd like to see how good AI is currently. We gave it just straight into the chatbot and took the first result out. We didn't do multiple runs. We didn't give it the best chance. We didn't feed it any course material. We just sort of wanted to emulate what is most likely a student would do, and then just gave it a very simple scoring system of green, which is largely fine without any major errors, yellow, which is it's got the sort of right ideas. A student would get some credit for this, and red, which is sort of major errors at some point down the line. And as you can see, most questions fell into the green category. So even with these sort of older chatbots, this was enough to raise eyebrows about assessment methods and thinking, it sort of does take a lot of part of the whole reason you're sort of at university is to get accredited for being able to show that you can demonstrate these skills. And if that isn't a demonstration, if handing something in or coursework isn't a demonstration of that, or feasibly couldn't be, then that is quite a big problem for a lot of institutions. And there's a sort of headline for you. Again, this is 18 months old at this point. And here's the breakdown year by year. So as you can see, it really did struggle past first year. But again, I'd love to rerun this on the latest AI models as things have moved remarkably quick. Even the last month's releases of models have been quite a step up in the last 30 days. So can we detect it? We also asked the lecturers to think specifically, not just is it correct, but how close would this be to a sort of standard student work you would get? And then further, how likely would you be able to detect that, which was about as good as a coin flip? And then finally, how easy would it be feasibly for a student to adapt this into something that looked meaningfully like their own independent work? And most staff agreed it would be quite trivial for those students to do so. So there's huge academic integrity concerns. And yeah, that really is the sort of key problem is how easily this can be adapted to look like your own independent work. I mean, I'm sure we're all aware that of the sort of accusations and worries of cheating going around is sort of one of the key discussions using AI in education. So yeah, the lecturers are well aware of that and when presented with it. So how are the students using it specifically? So again, this was sort of the I'd be interested to see how much things have changed, but certainly sort of this was again about a year post initial ChatGPT. People were still sort of getting their feet into things. So there was still a lot of stigma. I'm sure there still is to be quite honest. So it's a sort of 60-40 split. But already we'd had the majority who have used it in some way and admitted directly to using it in their assignments. Um, so here was again the result, the breakdown of that at the times. You can see the vast majority of students are using the sort of free tiers. And again, these are absolutely ancient models by sort of today's standards, but that is just what was available, and even they were getting sufficient results. But as you can see, the vast majority of students were using 3.5, so a very sort of outdated model, and led to a lot of them having sort of expectations that it wasn't quite as good at maths and that they were a bit more protected. But as you can see from the later models and the results on coursework, it did actually do quite successfully. So yeah, that's the sort of main perception gap, is that students think it wouldn't be quite as good as it was. I'm sure that's changed and updated in the last year again. It was just one student's perspective on that specifically. Again, GPT 3.5 was much more of a chatbot and far away from anything you'd want to use for serious professional reasoning work. But it did create that sort of general perception. And just breaking down the sort of differences between the two groups. So, in general, there was a conception of cheating in both that was quite high, but it was obviously much higher in the non-AI users. And despite that, both groups still genuinely see it as usually wrong, or at least that's, there's going to be plenty of caveats within there, but that certainly it's quite easy for things to step into territories that would lead to academic integrity concerns. Um, there is support within the AI users, particularly for integrating it in some way as part of their own learning. I'm sure as we've seen, people have sort of done that independently and use it along with a whole host of other online tools for their own independent study. And there is some support for doing that across, wider classes, as opposed to that just being an independent thing. I think there's a sort of lack of guidance for a lot of students on AI tools, and that was highlighted quite a lot. But with the main concern with AI tools, with AI users, from AI users being, is that obviously you can over rely on it, you can give you the wrong answer. And then for the non-AI users, so even for the people who aren't using it, are concerned that it's going to affect their degree. If other people are doing it, if this is the new established norm, then even if you try to completely avoid it and wash your hands of it all, it's still going to sort of affect people's perceptions of your degree and certificate and hard work. So in general, there are lots of shared concerns. So neither group is really comfortable going to in-person exams. I don't think the lecturers want that. I don't think the students want that. Is that necessary in some cases? Maybe if you can't safeguard your assignments, but maybe the cat is out of the bag on that. And it's hard. And that people use these courseworks in all sorts of different ways. Often it can be like lower marks that sort of build to the wider exam, and it's more of a supporting structure in the wider sort of syllabus, as opposed to it being fully coursework based. But that's again different course by course. But in general, even outside of just the AI users, there is a huge concern about degree devaluation and the general conception that it not just can give the wrong answer, but students, at least at this time, thought that they usually typically did. Um, And this was a quote from one of the students who we had in a focus group. So we performed a focus group with 6 AI users and 6 non-AI users to get a lot of these perceptions. And this one points to sort of the crux of the issue, and maybe even wider societal points that we don't have time to cover. But yeah, sort of there is some very deep-seated anxiety, and rightfully so. And then there are some slightly more positive perceptions of taking this and using it as a tool, as a means of furthering your own understanding and education, and sort of taking advantage of its ability to explain things and use it to walk through things step by step. This is sort of what the reasoning models did, and how they came about. Is you could initially prompt the ChatGPT non-reasoning models to think step by step, and you could sort of see how they would explain their thinking. And some, students I've spoken to have found that helpful for with their own thinking. Um, so yeah, there's sort of idea there is that if you're going to use these tools professionally, you've got to be able to critically evaluate them. Otherwise, sort of what's the point? Um, so what should we do? There's again lots of discussion here. It's kind of hard to think where to approach. I think trying to block it completely is unrealistic. There are those sort of hacky solutions. I think we talked about prompt injections or hiding something in that only the chatbots um, going to see. And I think nothing is quite a clean um, solution, and you have always got to sort of design assignments with some awareness of AI's prevalence nowadays, and ideally test. You've got to find a way of still testing and knowing your students' um, mathematical skills and abilities without relying purely on assignment, or knowing at least that there is the potential for it not to be as robust as it was. So the sort of five general recommendations are at least having that awareness, which I don't think many people don't have nowadays. Definitely collaborate with other maths lecturers and people making these assignments. Everybody's got a sort of different approach. Again, I personally more favour the one that's more demystifying and being open with your students about who are using those tools. I think there's a lot of it's that which must not be named at the moment. The students that are using it don't want an extra eye looking at them, or making assumptions about how they're using it, perhaps. And then I think the staff also don't want the last 10% of students that aren't using it, or 40% at least 18 months ago, to be aware of it and to start using it. So yeah, trying to create sort of demystifying that space and removing the stigma, I think is really important. And also just staying up to date. As I said, the last 30 days have been quite a revolution in just AI technology and development, and can feel a bit overwhelming to stay on top of, but thankfully they follow quite a standard release window of all the major companies just trying to outdo each other by pumping in all the world's money. And that's the loop we've all been trapped in for the last 3 years. Um, so some just practical examples of how you might do that. You can get students to upload their ideas or solutions, or get ChatGPT to generate some of these and then look specifically for errors in its understanding or its output. Again, the idea is if you're training to be a expert in a field, you can pull apart someone else's reasoning. That is quite a important skill to have and refine. So there is opportunity there to sort of do these tasks that perhaps wouldn't have been there before. Work with your students to sort of create and find these boundaries. They'll definitely know, this is again my other problem with sort of patching in solutions to people cheating, is that typically they will find ways around it. So having a sort of open dialogue initially about how you're using the tools and technologies, particularly for something so new, allows people to sort of learn best practices from each other. It's really hard to establish convention. I think this is why a lot of lecturers and staff have, and just universities in general, have struggled with thinking, well, what is the rules surrounding this, particularly when it comes to submission. And I think most staff and students are struggling with the exact line there. That's not been clearly defined. And there's perhaps a wider question. Um, so yeah, and then sort of as part of that transparency is having your disclosure in your chat logs. This is just sort of seen as good practice in regards to your general research, in the same way you sort of will save your URLs of a blog you read, or anything that has any relevance to your course or submission. You should be able to backtrack down far enough down past the line. So to put that in a really nice sort of three rememberable words for you, these are the sort of key ideas I try to drill into everybody's heads. But verification, transparency, and ownership. If you can't verify it, there's not much point, is there? I could generate a lovely essay on quantum mechanics right now. It wouldn't be of any consequence to anybody without the skills to verify it. If you're not being honest about those tools in your workflow professionally, then you're going to have errors and you're not going to be able to backtrack them. You're not going to be able to, again, discuss or find ways to move forward. It's just a nightmare waiting to happen. Again, I feel like academia particularly is struggling with this due to the sort of, I mean, and there's lots of things I think we talked about earlier about the perception of being perfect and not wanting to, perhaps have people assume that, again, you use these tools. And similarly, that comes down to even the ownership, is how much editing, how much authorship is the limit. If it's not clearly defined by the lecturers, if it's not something that's discussed, everyone's going to take their own interpretation on that. So these really are the sort of core three principles that I think always apply. You should always be thinking about when thinking about I think just LLM, artificial intelligence use professionally, but specifically does really apply for lecturers and staff. Um, so thinking about how students and maths lecturers can utilize AI, more effectively or do something positive with it. There's something called the self-explain method. The idea being is that as opposed to just having information thrust at you constantly, as we do in this modern age, is you sort of slow things down a bit, and if you can explain something, I mean, it's you're much more likely to remember something if you can sort of teach it. But the idea being is, I think we focus specifically on mathematical proofs, as that's an area math students typically struggle with, coming from sort of sixth form GCSE, where it's quite rigorous and formula based, and then all of a sudden you have to think in and talk in and work in abstracts. Um, so proof comprehension and understanding could be a real barrier for a lot of first year math students. So we tried to build a tool. Let me see if I can drag it into the window. Can we see that? I hope. But the idea being is that you could take a mathematical proof. Let me see if I've got some more. But you could take a proof and then break it down line by line. And at each stage, ask yourself the questions what, why, or link. Now, you don't need an AI for this. You could just do this on paper, but the sort of immediate feedback, you can gamify it slightly. So I've getting it to score the students' uses here, break down what they did wrong, right and wrong, where the areas to improve are. You could even, if you were a lecturer, let's say uploading this or you're doing this specific proof, you could perhaps tell it to guide them in a certain way or give them specific hints. I know everybody has slightly different conventions for their courses, but the sort of idea here is can we take something that's causing a lot of anxiety, and rightfully so in the maths educational and assignment space, and turn it into a positive learning tool. Now, this isn't something that you necessarily couldn't already do inside a ChatGPT window, but by giving it a certain structure, it's taking it from being a sort of task that can wander off into the distance. Again, that's the thing with these chatbots; they're kind of completely freeform. Um, Whereas this sort of forces them to stick to a structure where you can hopefully stay on task and stick to a more simplified sort of Socratic self-explain method, as opposed to feeling like you have to yeah, just go through the endless sort of textbook knowledge, or read a web page or a chatbot's response to understand it. It's trying to be a bit more involved and sort of bridge the gap between using AI and just taking the answer rote verbatim, as opposed to using your own words. This is very specifically about the AI judging your own words. So yeah, as we can see, things have changed a lot in even 18 months, and the sort of key differentiator, what we all want to know and why people come to university, is to prove and demonstrate mathematical um, skills and ability in our students. And that's sort of where I know it's the typical thing to just push the solution back onto the lecturers. I'm sure you're all used to that, but it is a sort of case by case basis, and one that I think starts with demystifying and sort of trying to remove the um, anxieties and stigmas surrounding it, because it's not going away, and there's lots of potential as much as there's lots of concern. But yeah, so these are the sort of the key facts again, just for everybody, and I'll just jump to, I guess, the last slide. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Sorry, I thought Rachel was going to jump in there and do the questions. Couldn't find the right button. Right. Okay. Do we have any questions in the Q&A? Um, so there is a question from James. How do you stay ahead of the AI game in the department? Do AI champions or AI committees exist in your department? So I wonder, Sammy, you can answer that. Maybe other people can put a reply also in the chat.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is that institutions move quite slowly. So these things have sort of almost spontaneously emerged, as opposed to being dictated by department. I think some departments are starting to. It started originally as the AI Learning Circle, which was a community of academics just across Warwick who were concerned and started meeting regularly to sort of discuss these concerns. But it certainly is something I would consider having for, departments, particularly with the rate of change and just not everyone's on the same level of literacy with these tools. There's plenty of people who, and rightfully so, have thought they've done this for 20 years one way. Who are they to suddenly change now? And of course, that's perfectly reasonable. There's going to be, and again, there's no sort of convention in this right now. Everybody's sort of working that out. But that's why it's so important to, yeah, have these committees, have these discussions. So yeah, I think that's a great idea to have those sorts of places for discussion on something so, ill-defined and yet so upending.
Mhm. Right, I've got a query about the self-explanation map. So, can you comment on the plan for the self-explanation map and whether it be available publicly?
Yes, so the app I've built or we've built is built to be it's sort of an MVP, but it's very specifically built as robustly as possible so that it is something you could download and host to, let's say, a few hundred students at your university safely and privately. Um, we're not yet to release it or post it publicly. There's still always licensing issues and something we need to talk about with the university. But if you're interested, please do reach out, send me an email. I would love to discuss that with you and Warwick and just get it into sort of more mass students' hands, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be great. Perhaps you could ask just one last question from Phil Ramsden. So, um, there are HE cultures in which oral stroke vivas are standard even at undergraduate level. Have we anything to learn from them? Might they allow genuine open assessments and at the same time fair assessment? So trying to get around AI that way, I guess.
Yeah, this was one of the initial sort of knee-jerk reactions of how do we deal with artificial intelligence, or do we just go back to exams? And I think that there's elements to that I really like. So the idea of actually really getting a sort of firm on hands-on understanding of where your students' knowledge is at, it not just being sort of behind a textbook, it's sort of living proof that I mean, that's the first thing you should do if you're having academic integrity concerns is just talk to the student. Again, if you're submitting something and you're saying you've got ownership of it, that means you can stand behind every single word. So you should very quickly be able to talk to them and work out whether they can or can't stand behind the words that they have claimed um, are their own. Does that mean doing that for every single assignment? I don't know if lecturers would be able to cope with that workload or how normal that could become, but that it's certainly something discussed and worth looking into. Um, it's just to be extremely speculative. We aren't far away. I mean, there already exists glasses that look as natural as the ones I'm wearing that can sort of augment your skills and abilities. So I guess those that are determined will always find a way. But my sort of thinking on the matter is there is nothing that is completely robust, and I personally think the best approach is having a genuine open culture to be able to discuss and establish these conventions because they're going to happen slowly anyway. And just it feels like for the last 3 years, there's been a lot of heads in hands and sands, and completely understandably. But there's also lots of discussion in spaces like this too that I think really needs to be pushed as often as possible because that's how those conventions come about in the first place.
Okay, right. Well, th thanks very much for that answer, and I think we should thank Sam for a great talk. Cool. And thanks to all the other speakers we had today as well. I should have said that, and we'll just wrap up today.